So we have been in this sermon series called One Another. And really, I told you from day one that the purpose of this sermon series is to promote our small groups. Over the summer, our small groups take a sabbatical, they take a rest. But as we get back into the fall, it's important for us to get back into the small groups. And we do this strategically. And the reason why, it requires a lot of work. Obviously, small group leaders, it takes manpower to organize small groups, to organize leaders, to train them, to do all these things. But I'm honestly convinced that this is biblical. The Bible lays it out that Jesus ministered to large crowds. But he was strategic, and he spent his time with 12, we call them apostles. But even within that relationship, he had 3 that he really developed as leaders, Peter, James, and John. And so for us as a church, we gather on Sunday morning. That's a big part of what we do. That's why we are putting up this building on 471, because we want to reach Castroville. We want to reach Rio Medina. We want to reach Petrenko. We want to reach Highway 90, Lacoste, 90. All these places around, people need a good church. The sad thing is that people... They are looking for churches, and they say they can't find churches. Now, I don't believe that. I think there's plenty of good churches. I think people are just very picky. But we want to be a church that allows people to come as they are and give them an opportunity to become more like Jesus. So Sunday morning is a big thing for us. Small groups are a big thing for us, and that's why we're talking about the one another's here. Today, we're going to talk about this one another, and it's called Be Hospitable to One Another. How many of y'all know what that word hospitality means? You ever heard of the hospitality industry? So I have my undergrad from North Texas, by the way. Segue. Did y'all know the Mean Green put a big old whooping on Arkansas yesterday? SEC who? Sorry. That's the first win we've had from, a Power 5 school in like over 10 years. So, hey, got to take it when you can get it. But at North Texas, I was a hotel restaurant major. My dream in life was to work at hotels, resorts, and I did. I worked at a number of hotels and resorts, and you just kind of feel like you're going to travel, you can do all those things. But the hospitality industry is a tough industry because you're constantly serving people, waiting on people. And if you've ever traveled, you know that people come and they have bad experiences. They're tired and they want their room, and they complain if something's not right. And as a hospitality person, you have to always smile and welcome them and make sure that you can do whatever you can to make their stay great. In fact, when my junior year at North Texas, I interviewed with Disney. I was going to go work for a semester at Disney. And when I was going through the interview, they made it very clear. They said, if you ever have a bad day, you should never let the guests know that you're having a bad day. Now, for y'all who've ever been to Disney, have y'all been to Disney? How many of you have ever had a bad experience at Disney? You actually, I did? Wow. Most time that's unheard of. You go and it's the magical kingdom. Everything is perfect because people are there. They don't complain. They show you genuine hospitality. But let's take a biblical look at what this word means. The word actually is made up of 2 Greek words. The first one is the word phileo. Y'all know this word. It's a Greek word for love. It's brotherly love. We talk about the Philadelphia Eagles. That's the city of brotherly love. That's what they say. It's more like brotherly shove. But that's the word phileo. Philadelphia means brotherly love. The word xenos has been made very popular in our political realm, and that is strangers. You've heard of the term xenophobia? During the campaigns, people were saying This person is he's xenophobic. And you're like, what does that mean? And you're like trying to Google, what does xenophobic mean? It's the fear of strangers. But that word, hospitality, literally means brotherly love for strangers. Hospitality means to love somebody who is a stranger like you would a brother. Now, in the hospitality industry, we do it for money, but biblically, you're told to do it because we love God and therefore we are to love others. The best example I can give you is from this movie called Lone Survivor. How many of y'all have seen this movie, Lone Survivor? Based on a true story about some Navy SEALs. 4 Navy SEALs. One of the guys is pretty well known, Michael Murphy. You've heard of this guy, maybe? The other guy who's pretty well known is Marcus Luttrell. And then you have 2 other Navy SEALs. They were in the mountains of Afghanistan on a recon mission. And while they were on this mission, they get discovered by a goat herder. And so they have to make this decision. This is a true story. Hollywood made a movie out of it. They have to make a decision. Do we kill the goats? Do we tie up the goats? Do we take this goat herder prisoner? Do we tie him up and leave him here? Do we kill him? Or do we set him free? Those are the real decisions that they had to wrestle with. And they came to the conclusion, actually, Michael Murphy, the lieutenant who was in charge of that Navy SEAL operation, he made the final decision to let him go. And because they let him go, they did the right thing. If they would have killed this goat herder, they would have been brought up on charges of murder in the court system. But this guy was not armed, and he was not a threat, and so they let him go, knowing that he was going to compromise their mission. As soon as they let him go, he makes his way down to the nearby village, and he lets the Taliban know. So the Taliban now send about 30 to 40 of their best fighting soldiers, and they come up and they surround these 4 Navy SEALs, and it's an all-out firefight. They have RPGs, they have high-powered weapons, and literally it's an all-out firefight. They're on this side of the mountain, and the reason why we know the story is because Marcus Luttrell is the only one who survived. And he said the reason why he felt he survived was to tell the story. And he goes on and talks about how his brothers fought bravely till the end, and how they created little pathways along the mountainside because they were literally falling on the mountainside, holding on, fighting from side to side, covering each other's backs, taking on fire, and watching brothers get shot. Michael Murphy puts himself, he's the lieutenant, puts himself out on an open ridge to make a phone call to let a rescue mission team know where to find them. In fact, he got shot, killed on that ridge, and received the Medal of Honor. 2 helicopters come in. One of them gets shot down. I think it was 18 more Navy SEALs, or 16 got killed that day. This was the most that Navy SEALs lost in one mission since World War II. And it happened. And one guy survives, and he tells a story. Now, if that was the story enough, that would have been enough of the story to make a Hollywood movie. But that's not the end of the story. There's more to the story. And here's the part of the story. Marcus Luttrell fights all night, slides down the hill, the mountain, and he finds a little waterfall. And he says, this water is refreshing. He begins to take dirt and mud and pack it into his open wounds because he's been shot. And he's thinking to himself, when daybreak comes, I'm going to fight to the end and die. So sure enough, daybreak comes and he is discovered. And if you see the movie, you know that this guy who discovers him, you don't know if he's friend or foe because he is a Muslim from Afghanistan. And they don't speak the language, and they're talking to each other. Michael Murphy has a grenade. He's about to blow them all up because he's ready to die. But this guy, he's not with the Taliban. This guy sees death in Marcus Luttrell. He sees death in Marcus Luttrell's eyes, and he decides to save him. He takes this complete stranger, a foreigner, an American, a Navy SEAL, and he takes him back to his village. And he begins to give him water and basic first aid, and he's just basically waiting for him to die because this guy is bleeding out so bad. Well, if that was the end of the story, that would be good enough, but it's not. Taliban show up. Word on the street is that this guy is hiding out a Navy SEAL, and we want him. If you were this guy, these were your own countrymen, you had an American who had been shooting at your countrymen, would you have turned him loose or would you have protected him? What would you have done? He decides to protect this soldier. And he tells the Taliban, he said, according to our ancient code, if we bring in a stranger, invite him into our home, he is like family now, and we will defend him. Of course, the Taliban and them go out into an all-out fight, and they protect this soldier to the point where he is rescued. He tells the story. Fast forward, the Taliban burned this guy's house down. This guy has to move, and Marcus Luttrell is trying to do everything he can. He probably already has. I was watching some old YouTube videos of their relationship. They're friends now. But he was trying to get him to come to Texas for his own safety because the Taliban want him dead. That is hospitality. The love, brotherly love of a stranger. That's what the Bible talks about when we are to love one another. We are to love our brothers, first and foremost, biological family members, but also brothers and sisters in the faith, but even more so to strangers. Because when we love a stranger like Jesus, we give them an opportunity to see the love of Jesus that they might not ever get a chance to see from someone else. So we're going to take a look at this. Here's a couple of verses in the New Testament that tell us about it. 1 Peter writes, he says this, he says, show hospitality to one another without what? Without what? Is it possible to be hospitable and yet just grumble? When we talk about small groups, our houses, we have these in homes. When you open up your home, sometimes it's easy to grumble because most of us will take the time to try to clean the kitchen, vacuum, sweep, mop. You're having guests over, right? But if we're not careful, the stress level goes up and we begin to grumble. I was in Castroville last week and I was having lunch, and I won't name the restaurant. It's a good restaurant. But I walked in and I'm trying to order, and there's nobody at the counter at this restaurant. And so I'm just sitting there waiting, and I look into the kitchen because I can see it in the kitchen, and there's two guys walking around, and they see me, that we make eye contact, but they're not part of the front, so they don't know how to do the cash register, so they just ignore me. So I'm still waiting. And then a few minutes later, the door opens up, and this young man walks in and comes around the counter, and he does this, literally. Yeah, take your order. I was like, yeah, I'll take the number one, please. Fine. Would you like fries with that? And I was like, and it was almost comedic. You ever seen Napoleon Dynamite? It felt like his brother, if you know the brother. And so and I finally just asked him, I said, are you all right? And he's, I'm just tired. And I was like, it's like 11 o'clock, and I was like, do you stay up late? I was playing Fortnite all night. And so I ordered, but I started thinking to myself, this is not the business you need to be in. Because have you ever had like waitresses and waiters that serve you, and they're like, you're inconveniencing them. Like, can I have some more water? Fine. I mean, that sometimes we laugh but sometimes that's how we are as a church. We're supposed to welcome strangers. As we get into our new building, people are going to come and they're going to be strangers. Maybe they're brothers in Christ, sisters in Christ, but they are strangers. And you might see them and you're like, here comes new people. what do they want? You know, and they're like, we want to know about Jesus. Fine. Old Testament or New Testament? But we can grumble with good intentions. Even if we're so hospitable that we open up our home to family, sometimes we can even grumble, and and it's you're like, you're defeating the whole purpose. You're supposed to be hospitable. Romans tells us this, that Paul says, share with the Lord's people who are in need, practice hospitality. What the needs were of that day and what the needs were really throughout all human history is a place to stay, food, a place to rest, water. That's the hospitality industry, right? I mean, you go to a hotel, you go to a resort, you go to a restaurant. But in biblical times, especially Old Testament days, there were no hotels. You were traveling, and you stopped, and you would see who would show you hospitality. Think about that in the story of the Good Samaritan. Jesus is traveling to Samaria. There is a woman at the well. She offers hospitality. She gives him a drink of water. Think about the Old Testament for a second. I'll show you one of the first places that I see this in the Old Testament. Are y'all familiar with a guy by the name of Abraham? So the story of Abraham is called to leave his family and to go to a land that God has promised him. And he takes his nephew Lot with him, and they're on this journey together. And so while they're on this journey, the scriptures tell us they get so blessed so much that there's not enough water to feed both of the herds. And so the herdsmen start to quarrel. And so Abraham and his nephew Lot, they say, hey, let's just not quarrel amongst each other. You go right, I'll go left. Or you can go left and I'll go right. Whatever you want, Abraham says, I'll do it. So Lot looks and he's like, wow. He looks and he sees this beautiful plain. And as he's looking, he sees these two ancient cities that are known to be Sodom and Gomorrah. But the beautiful landscape is like, man, I want that land. So Lot says, I'll take that. And Abraham says, fine, you can have that. I'll take the other way. So that's where they go in different directions. But Abraham knows that his nephew has pitched his tents right next to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. So in Genesis 18, we see in the scriptures, it says, Abraham looked up and he saw 3 men standing nearby. And when he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them, and he bowed down low to the ground. And he says, if I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servants by. Now, these are strangers. The scriptures tell us that there are 3 strangers. Some of your translation has a capital L. Many theologians believe that this is the Lord himself with 2 angels. They show up. Abraham knows there's something about these men that he bows down. But notice what he does in verse 4. This is what Abraham says, let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. And let me get you something to eat so that you may be refreshed, and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant. And then in verse 6, so Abraham hurried into the tent, told Sarai his wife to make some bread, so get some flour and knead it and bake some bread. And then he ran to the herd and he selected a choice tender calf, and he gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. And in verse 8, he then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared. And he set these before them. And while they ate, he stood near them under a tree. This is the purest example of showing brotherly love to strangers. Now, if you look at the text, did Abraham have a nice big house? It said he was in a what? Do you remember? It was in a tent. So sometimes we make excuses. Well, I would be more hospitable if I had a big old backyard with a huge patio and then I could entertain people. But until I have all that, I can't really be hospitable because I don't have a whole lot to offer. Well, biblical hospitality is you find whatever you can. He said, hey, here's a tree. Why don't y'all sit under the tree and I'm going to give you what I can. I got some bread, I got some milk, I got some curds, and I have, an animal we're going to go ahead and cook for you. But you don't have to have a whole lot of things in order to be hospitable. You just have to have the right heart. So these men have a message for him. Do y'all remember what the message is? Actually, it's for his wife. Do y'all remember the message? They said that this time next year, your wife, who is up in age, is going to have a baby. And she laughs. She's like, I'm way beyond those years. So is my husband. And they said, is anything impossible for God? No, you're gonna have a baby, Sarah. But while we're at it, I think we should tell you some other things, what's going to happen to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And so they began to walk out and look at the city. And they said, Abraham, we've heard the cry out from the wickedness of the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, and we're going to destroy these cities. Now, Abraham remembers, what does he remember? I got a family member there. Man, I can't let this go down. And so he begins to say, well, what if there's some righteous people there? If there's righteous people there, would you not judge the city along with the wicked? Because there's probably some good people there. And so they begin this dialogue between like 50 and 40 and 20, and it gets down to 10 people. And they're like, if you can find 10 righteous people, would you not destroy the city? And like, okay, we're not going to destroy the cities if we find 10 righteous people. So the very next chapter, you see two angels. The Lord's not with them. It was 3 in chapter 18. Chapter 19, you only see 2. They show up, and who greets them in the city? Lot. The scriptures tell us that he is one of the people at the wall. He watches who comes into the city, and he sees them coming in, and he's like, this is a wicked city. And he knows that these guys need to be protected, much like this guy that did with the Navy SEAL. And they're like, no, we'll just stay out here in the middle of the street and sleep tonight. And he goes, no, you're not sleeping out here. This city is wicked. You need to come stay at our place. And so finally he convinces them, and they're angels. They come to his house, and they spend the night there. Now here's where it gets kind of weird, but this is the Bible. The city is so wicked and perverted that these men, it says old and young, come to Lot's house, and they said, we want these men who are in your house, these angels, and we want to have sexual relations with these angels. And he's like, nah, you can't do that. These are my guests. I'm protecting them. I've invited them into my home. They're mine. Now, the ironic thing is that if you read the text, he's like, you can have my daughters. What kind of dad would do that? I don't know. Theologians believe because they were interested in the males, there was practiced homosexuality. That's where we get the word sodomy, from Sodom and Gomorrah. That he realized they didn't want the daughters, they wanted these men. So the angels take care of everything. The angels blind these guys, and they can't see, and they're like, and so they all get out. Now you know the story. Lot's wife looks back. She's turned into a pillar of salt. The daughters and Lot escape, and they go to a nearby village. But I bring up that story is because these men understood an ancient code, just like these men in Afghanistan. They knew the code of hospitality. In fact, the book of Hebrews tells us because of this that when you entertain strangers, be careful because you may be entertaining angels in disguise. Now, I don't know what the angelic realm looks like. I mean, I know it's spiritual, but it appears that they take on forms of humans or an appearance. That they can eat, they can talk, they can do these things. I know I have seen that movie, that TV show, Touched by an Angel. Y'all have seen that? It's a good show. That's how you can tell if it's an angel, if a light glows around the head. And then they have that really cool British accent. And they're like, I'm an angel sent by God. So this is what the Bible teaches as far as hospitality. So basic things of what hospitality means: sharing food, water, shelter with friends, family, or stranger. How many of you guys, parents, were very good at hospitality? Just kind of want to see a show of hands. I don't know if it's a generational thing, but I know my mom and dad were good at this. As a kid, I grew up, and there was always, it seemed like always a relative of some sort staying at our place. Whether they were traveling through on a vacation, whether they were having family problems, they needed a place of refuge for a little while, or whatever the case might be. In fact, one of my uncles was in a major car accident when I was probably 7 or 8, and he and his wife and his kids stayed with us for like a couple of weeks until he got healed. My dad was always just very hospitable to our family members. Now, I got to be honest with you. I'm not that hospitable. My family can learn a lot from my dad. In fact, when my dad died, that was his biggest desire, and his prayer request was to take care of the orphan and the widow and those people who needed assistance. That was just who he was. But over the years, I don't know if it's stranger danger. You don't want a lot of people in your house. You're like, I don't know, I got small kids, and, what if? And then you're like, I'm sorry, there's no room in the inn, Jesus. You can't, that's a biblical story. Remember that when they were trying to have a baby and they no room? Go stay out in the garage with, the manger, Jesus. But we have not been good as a family being hospitable. Now, real quick, and we'll finish up with this next verse, but real quick, I just want you to just think in your head biblically all the times where Jesus was shown hospitality. So a couple places that come to my mind. Remember the sisters, Mary and Martha? They brought Jesus in with his disciples, and they cooked, and they let him eat there. Remember that? Do you remember when Jesus was talking to the tax collector, and he tells him, he says, hey, Zacchaeus, come on down from that tree. Salvation has come to your house. Today I'm going to go to your house and stay with you. You read that, and you're like, well, Jesus is kind of just bombarding him and kind of just invited himself over to stay. But that was the hospitality of that day. Do you remember the Pharisee who had Jesus over and his disciples to eat? So all throughout the scripture, it's there. We don't realize it, but it is embedded in the scriptures. Jesus himself shows hospitality in the upper room when he washes his servants or his disciples' feet. Or when he's with the crowd and he does the miracle of the fish and the loaves, or turning water into wine. The biggest thing that Jesus says is that I'm going to prepare a place for you in my Father's house. There's many rooms. He's getting ready for his church, his bride, to come home. He's going to welcome us and take care of us. Everything about God's nature is hospitable. And yet, most of us are very selfish. Most of us don't want to open up our homes, don't want to extend a love to someone in need, because we're more Western in our thinking than we are biblical in our thinking. So here's a picture of the early church, and I'll end with this. So this is right after the church was formed in Acts chapter 2. And this is what it says. Now, it says right before this, there are thousands of people who are part of the new church. Verse 45 says, they sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. That was their public gathering of worship. But then it says they broke bread where? What does it say? They broke bread in their homes, and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts. And they were praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. That last verse implies that there were strangers to the faith, that there were people who were coming into the church or to these homes, and they were learning about God. Now, when we open up our doors to this church, you're going to have people who come here that we come from a vast background, even within Christian circles. We all have a lot of preferences, but there's some who are going to come and they don't know anything about the faith. That's the culture that we live in. The easy thing is to push them away and say, you know what, we don't have time for you because you scare us. Or we can say, let you come in, let us become part of the family, let us take care of your needs, and let us share the good news of Jesus so that you might, what the scriptures say, the Lord added to the number daily those who are being saved. For my family, this is just my family, and I would never try to push this on any of y'all. We've struggled over the last year to make this decision to foster. And I know other families are praying about this, and it's been a really good decision for us. And I'll tell you one thing that brought peace into our home is when we had a conversation with one of the caseworkers. The caseworker came into our home, and she asked us, she knew we were a Christian family, and she said, "Hey, have you ever heard this country song?" And I can't even remember the country song. I'll put it on our Facebook page, but it's a country song. And she said, "Let me tell you the story about this country song." And she begins to tell us the story about this country song. And the country song is about a little girl who is in a broken home. Her mom and dad are physically fighting and arguing. And the little girl hides behind the couch. And then one day, mom and dad get into it so bad that mom and dad die. I think the dad goes to prison, mom dies. And the CPS lady comes and takes this little girl out of the home. And she takes her to her foster home. And the foster home take this little girl to church. And this little girl goes to church for the very first time in her life. And when she's at church, the Sunday school teacher is showing them a picture of Jesus. And the little girl says, "I know that man." She says, "That's the man who was with me behind the couch when mom and dad were fighting." Our little foster girl went to live with her grandmother last week. We said goodbye to her, and we asked her, of course she was only 5. We asked her, we said, "Is there anything you learned from us while you were with us?" And the number one thing she said, she mentioned about 5 things. The number one thing she said is that y'all taught me to pray for my mom and for my dad. And we did. We pray, and we still do pray for them because we want the best for that little girl. We want the best for her home. But she knows how to pray now. And she knows how to pray for, intercede for her mom and for her dad. I don't know what is going to happen with us as a church. I don't. But I do know that God wants us to show his love to a broken world. And so when people come to Vista, we have to have this in the forefront of our thinking is to love others. And love is sacrificial. That's why it costs Jesus everything. And when you serve others, it's sacrificial. And when you are hospitable, it's sacrificial. But that's who the nature of God is. He sacrificed everything for us. So as a small group, again, the reason why we're going through this sermon series is because this is the best place to get to know one another in the context of small groups. And I would just be open with you right now. We're an 11-year-old church. But I would ask you to pray for more leaders, for more small group leaders. I would ask you to pray for our middle school ministry because we need middle school leaders. And I would ask you to pray for high school ministry because we need high school mentors and leaders. I would ask you to pray for our children's ministry because according to Dr. Rohrbach, who is the superintendent of our school district in Medina Valley ISD, we are the fastest growing school district and of about 30 districts in the San Antonio, Austin area. What does that mean? That means there's a lot of families looking for Jesus. And I'd love to be a church that ministers to them. I can't do this. This church is beyond me now, and it needs to be beyond me. It needs to be us. And that's why we need all of you guys in this together.